save taxpayer dollars, anywhere from 4 to 11 for every dollar invested. But again, the resources are woefully inadequate. Second, we need to create incentives for building stronger and tie existing federal funding streams to the adoption and enforcement of strong modern building codes. Disaster resilient and sustainable construction and the use of stronger building codes has proven to save lives, reduce damage of natural disasters, and protect the environment. Adopting building codes is the single most effective thing that we can do to save lives and property. Third, promote the hardening of lifeline infrastructure. Lifeline infrastructure provides indispensable services that enable continuous operations of critical businesses and government functions, and without the prompt restoration, would risk health, safety, and economic security, key elements to Homeland Security. We also need to incentivize investments through tax benefits. We need to make it easier for individuals, businesses, and government to invest in resiliency. We need to ensure the use of resilient American-made products in the construction and retrofit of our key lifeline infrastructure. And finally, and maybe most importantly, we need to build capacity. We must ensure that states, locals, tribal governments, regional entities are given the tools and resources that they need to increase capacity and capability to even identify risks and hazards and mitigate those risks before the next crisis occurs. For this country to be successful in enhancing our resiliency, we must focus on capacity building at all levels of government and then turn to considerations of sustainability, adaptability, and creative financial instruments that can be leveraged to drive socially responsible investments in resilience. This is also going to involve simplifying and streamlining programs, and this committee is going to need to focus on effective grants management and oversight so that we can leverage these investments systematically and systemically for national resilience. As we launch into the 2021 hurricane season, we're very excited to join thought leaders like you to identify opportunities for policy changes. We must invest in these federal resources so that we can ultimately save lives and livelihoods. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams. Thank you to all of our witnesses for your testimony. I will remind the subcommittee that we will each have 5 minutes to question the panel. I will now recognize myself for questions. While the impacts of the climate crisis will vary depending on the specific U.S. region, in my home state of Florida, policymakers must grapple with the challenge of a longer and more intensifying hurricane season. Additionally, as I'm sure you all know, sea level rise continues to impact our coastal communities, contributing to flooding and erosion hazards, saltwater intrusion, and changes to coastal ecosystems. Mr. Nye, please comment on the climate challenges in states like Florida and elaborate, if you will, on the impacts you expect the climate crisis to have on other regions of the U.S.
Thank you very much. So in Florida, we have a problem where water is coming over the shore. As the ocean gets warmer, it gets bigger. This is what causes sea level rise. Water's coming over the shore, places like Cape Canaveral, for example, and then water's also coming up through the limestone. And so there's an irony when you talk about diversity and equity, where people wanted to live near the shore in Miami Beach and Miami, two closely related but separate cities. But then as the sea level rise comes over the top and up through the limestone, people want to live in higher ground. So the areas that used to be for favored by lower income people are now being gentrified. And this is evidence of climate change. And it's difficult to get insurance in some places where you park your car because salt water gets in the wheel wells. And so this is only going to get worse. We got to stop putting greenhouse gases in the air, and we've got to come up with new ways to provide electricity that's renewable and reliable to everybody. The co-chair, the ranking member made reference to you never know what broadband you're going to get. Well, let's make it so the broadband is always good for everybody. When neighborhoods are healthy for working, then people work more and stay healthier. But we need big changes, everybody. And I just reflect all the time on my parents, who were both in World War II. My father was a prisoner of war for almost 4 years. My mother was one of the code girls working to decrypt German submarine radio traffic. Everybody in the country was involved in solving this global problem. Everybody was on it. So in many ways, I'm excited about the future.
You know what I love so much about what you just said, though. Everybody cared about it. This was not a Republican issue, a Democratic issue. Everybody in the country cared about this issue, and I think it's so critical to us getting to where we need to. I want to go quickly to Mr. Brown. You know, you talked about your perspective as an emergency manager. You're there on the ground. What are some of the on-the-ground emergency preparedness and response improvements you've seen at the local level since President Biden took office?
I think the conversation around climate change and the realness of the threat and the need to prepare has increased. And I think there's a greater focus on the mitigation and the pre-disaster mitigation. The additional funding, we have leaned forward and started to plan and work with our less resourced communities to support them in developing their grant projects. We anticipate that grant being released later this year. They are limited resource communities, both urban and rural, that we have to provide some additional resources to. They have a part-time emergency manager or one person shop. These are very vulnerable communities that we need to support. And so as these grant dollars are released, I hope that we can really talk about building capacity amongst emergency managers across the country. We should not have any part-time or one-shop emergency management offices. These are full-time responsibilities related to preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. By broadening the field and the capacity also in emergency management, we can also build a diverse workforce that we need. So we have people from the community who understand the community needs and are able to respond more effectively.
Mr. Brown, thank you so much. I am going to, at this time, recognize the ranking member, Ms. Kamick, for her questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman Demings, and thank you again to all of our witnesses here today and to our colleagues who have joined us. So this question is for all of our witnesses. Like so many of the challenges that we face, borders and countries all share similar challenges. So I'm going to pose this question to you all, starting with Mr. Brown. According to a recent media report, China now accounts for 27% of total global greenhouse gas emissions, which is now more than all other developed countries combined. Now, to me, this just seems like one more reason to add to the list of why China poses an increasing threat to our homeland security. And I am concerned when it comes to climate change issues that Beijing will benefit the most if we hamper American innovation via new regulations and efforts to stifle innovation. So to what extent do you see China's climate impacts as a concern to the United States homeland security?
Thank you, Ranking Member. I think that this is a global challenge that requires every country, every state and local government to rise up to the challenge and become energy efficient. We have started to pursue looking at changing our fleet to promote energy efficiency. That is occurring across the state government as well. And so every policy change to promote energy efficiency as Mr. Nye mentioned, change the human impacts related to greenhouse gases would be appreciated and help to minimize the threat of climate change. Again, emergency managers are consequent managers. We deal with the impacts of climate change.
And Mr. Brown, I hate to reclaim my time here, but I asked specifically about China. I understand the state's perspective. With that, I'm gonna have to turn it over to Mr. Bill Nye. Mr. Nye, could you comment on China's climate impacts as a concern to United States Homeland Security?
Well, as we say, everything every single one of us does affects everyone in the world because we all share the air. So as people in China try to reach the level of service that we have in transportation and energy use here in the States and the Western world, they're going to use more and more energy. And what we want is for China and places in the developing world everywhere to skip the greenhouse gas intensive step and go to more energy efficient, more renewably produced energy systems and electric grids everywhere. And so this, as a guy, I was born in the States. I'm from the US. I want the US to be the world leader in this. Look around you. Almost everything that you're touching and using right now is manufactured in another country. This is the up and the downside of globalization. But as those other countries go into more manufacturing intensive economies, they are going to produce more greenhouse gases. So what we want to do is lead. Yes, I understand very much understand your concern about competition from China and so on. But this idea that if you give something to somebody, it means you've taken it from somebody else. This zero-sum idea is not going to work in the long run because we all only have one atmosphere. So let's be leaders. And I'll advocate again for wind, solar, geothermal energy, heat storage. And I would like us to take some risks and invest in fusion technologies. This could, as I like to say, change the world.
Now, Mr. Nye, and thank you for your comments. Before I jump to Ms. Williams, just quick yes or no, or
Gentlewoman's time. I'm sorry, please. You have 47 seconds. Please.
Don't short me. Don't short me, Chairwoman Deming. Mr. Nye, do you consider China to be a developing country?
No, it's in between. It's not easy to categorize it as one thing and the other. And when you go there, they're extraordinary cities with cranes on every block, and then the rural areas where people don't have clean water.
I got to over to Ms. Williams for the remaining 20 seconds that I've got. Thank you. Ms. Williams, same question to you with regard to China's climate impacts as it relates to Homeland Security.
Well, I think we have very much established that increasing risks that are driving climate impacts and disaster impacts are a tremendous threat to our homeland. And we need to look at this globally. I think Mr. Nye and Mr. Brown highlighted the fact that this is a global conversation that the United States has an opportunity to lead. But we don't even talk about climate adaptation using the same language that other countries use. Adaptation, mitigation have different meanings here and there. And we need to make sure that we are leading by example, but that we are also engaged in the conversation using the same terms, a same common understanding of what we are trying to accomplish so that we can tackle those that are the greatest offenders at driving these risks and impacts.
The chair thanks Ms. Williams for her response and thanks the ranking member for her line of questions. At this time, the chair will now recognize other members for questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. In accordance with the guidelines laid out by the chairman and ranking member, I will recognize members in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority. Members are also reminded to unmute themselves when recognized for questioning. The chair now recognizes for 5 minutes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Sheila Jackson Lee.
Thank you so very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to both of you, the ranking member, and as well the chair for this particular very important hearing. If I'm reminded, the reason why this is extremely important is because we are aware that despite the pressing need to address the risks proposed by climate change, the Trump administration disregard these challenges, increase the likelihood that Americans would experience these risks, unfortunately. Very grateful that we are beginning to turn the corner with the Biden administration and the American Jobs Plan and the administration's budget proposal, which has aggressively looked to rectify President Trump's failures and directly address the challenges that are so very important. I want to pose a question to Mr. Nye, and I thank you for recounting the history that suggests in the work of your parents that when there is a crisis, we all pull together. Let me put on the record, of course, what I experienced in 2017 and what I recently experienced at the beginning of 2021. 2017, 21 trillion gallons of rainfall fell on Texas, Louisiana. Most of it was in the Houston Metroplex. I watched constituents of mine, a family of 6, wash away, not in an ocean, not in a river, but in a bayou that flowed over into the main streets. Harris County covers 1,778 square miles, and 41,500 square miles of landmass were impacted by Hurricane Harvey. That, I might say, was a catastrophic climate crisis. Then again, in 2021, unbeknownst to us, came a, when I say unbeknownst, unexpected, unbeknownst, came a freeze here in Texas with a grid that did not work, which saw about 100 people die. So if I might, Mr. Nye, taking those two catastrophic incidences, quite different, one coming in the summer months, unexpectedly, still trying to overcome, one coming in what is supposed to be winter, but we in Houston don't really know it that way, but life was lost. Could you explain the scientific relationship between greenhouse gases and larger scale climate events, such as what I've just represented to you, and for America to understand that the loss of life can continue to grow and grow under these natural, or maybe I should say unnatural disasters that have come about through the harshness of climate change and the inattentiveness that we have had over the decades. Mr. Nye?
Thank you very much. So the problem fundamentally, as the world gets warmer, the ocean gets warmer, the ocean then drives these storms. So it's as water vapor goes up in the sky and condenses back to liquid and rains, the circulation is driven harder and harder. And so climate models, and the word model refers to computer programs, we try to predict the fluid mechanics, the way the air and water move around. The storms are getting bigger and they're moving more slowly. So they're dropping more water in places like Houston. Then the other subtle problem, or once was subtle problem, is the jet stream, the circulation in the Northern Hemisphere, gets pushed up and down as the world's climate becomes less stable, as these storms move around. And that caused this cold snap in Texas. And then, I used to work in the oil field, and I have a sense of the prideful nature of Texans. I understand you had your own electrical grid, but it wasn't well enough secured against the weather.
Absolutely.
Sort of straightforward things were not done for years through, what my understanding, through free market ideas that this stuff would take care of itself, that any electrical grid any electrical supplier would of course invest in the necessary things to make sure things were safe. But apparently that is not what happened, and it was a catastrophe. This is what I talk all the time. We need all the regulations we need, but no more, but we do need regulations.
Can I quickly go to Mr. Brown for just a second? Thank you very much, Mr. Nye. When these disasters occur, you are the state coordinator, emergency management services. I imagine you deal with a lot of first responders, police, EMS, firefighters. Can you explain how, when these disasters occur, you put real human beings in the line of danger as they have to rescue persons, provide the first line of defense for saving people? Could you just give that information?
The gentlewoman's time has expired, but the witness may answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize. I cannot see that clock, but I thank you for your courtesy. Thank you so very much. Mr. Brown?
Thanks, Congresswoman. Thanks, Chairwoman. Yes, we help to coordinate all of the first responders who put their lives on the line when it comes.
With the rise in extreme weather events, it's worth noting that according to FEMA, roughly 40% of small businesses hit by natural disasters never reopen, and I've certainly seen this within our state of Iowa. Further, 90% of smaller companies fail within a year unless they can resume operations within 5 days. This is obviously devastating to the livelihoods of so many of my constituents, many of whom are small business owners and are facing severe catastrophic threats all year round, from flooding to tornadoes and to the derecho that we had last year. We know that increased pre-disaster mitigation activities and strong modern construction standards are the best line of defense in the face of catastrophes and will ultimately save taxpayer dollars while protecting lives. On that note, Ms. Williams, can you talk about the importance of Congress working to create incentives that encourage business owners, homeowners, and communities to build more resiliently?
Thank you, ma'am. I think the first question that these companies and businesses need to answer is, what are the risks that I face? The lack of knowledge of risk across this country is tremendous. You can't attack a risk that you aren't aware of. So I think that is the first line of defense, is coming together as a community to identify risks and hazards as a system, not as an individual structure or an individual piece of infrastructure, but systemically. And that's how we build community resilience. Insurance is a key aspect of this. Individuals and businesses are not aware of the lack of coverage that they are facing in the wake of a disaster. And the federal government is not going to provide the resources to make them whole. So we spend a tremendous amount of time trying to educate people on how to cover their risks in a very meaningful way. But as you noted, the most important thing that people can do is identify that risk, draw down that risk through investments in pre-disaster mitigation, and we'll change the trajectory of the risk profile across this country.
Thank you. And as I stated, as someone who represents a Midwestern state that runs along the Mississippi River, my district does not border the Missouri, but I also have the Missouri. We had flooding there last year, and then we had the derecho this past year. I have a deep understanding of the massive loss caused by flooding and other natural disasters. Because of this, I also know of the endless cycle of destruction, where homes are built over and over again in the same subpar standards that often help lead to their destruction, and it put communities' lives and taxpayer dollars at risk. Ms. Williams, again, can you talk about the power of strong construction in the face of catastrophes, how you and the insurance industry help to mitigate that risk and identify that risk, and any examples you have based on research performed by the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, which you mentioned in your testimony, where the use of more modern building standards are proven to help homes withstand extreme climate events? What policies can we be working to create in Congress that will better shield communities like mine in Iowa from severe disasters?
Thank you again. We have some very exciting things happening across this country as states are leading the way in helping individual homeowners invest in strengthening their home. And I know Mr. Brown probably has some comments on this too, as he's been keenly focused on underserved communities and how we can help strengthen their home. If COVID taught us anything, it's the importance of housing as infrastructure. So our friends at IBHF have done a tremendous job, not only identifying those retrofits of the existing housing stock that need investments for roof tie downs, for cripple wall stabilization, and for wildfire mitigation techniques that can significantly impact the risk posed to a homeowner. And we are working with states across the country to help put resources in the hands of homeowners to draw down their risk and invest in their homes. So I think Congress helping certainly remove, as Ms. Hill said, the moral hazard of not doing the right thing and not investing in your homes, I think is one of the most important things that congressional leaders can do. And as I mentioned in my testimony, tax incentives can also play a tremendous role for those that have the resources to be able to invest, to just get them over the hump, to do the right thing before a disaster and not when we're worried about recovering from catastrophe.
Thank you. And then I just wanted to make a mention to Mr. Nye or Dr. Nye. Thank you so much. And we found during the pandemic that there are regulations we no longer need. So as important as regulation is in safety, it's also important to realize when regulation is not needed. And I appreciate your comments on fusion and nuclear power as also an upcoming power source. So thank you.
Thank you so much. The gentlewoman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. That was quick. I didn't even get a chance to recognize myself. But It's a real honor and privilege to be here once again, and thank you for this timely hearing that we're having today. Mr. Brown, as we continue to combat the effects of climate change, I'd like to know how historically disadvantaged people, and specifically people of color, could benefit from the new green technology, additional infrastructure spending, and private sector innovation. What are the steps that the federal government can take to deliver equitable relief to disadvantaged communities as we respond to climate crisis and extreme weather events?